Welcome to Dare Yourself. I'm Natalie Kogan. I'm coming to you from my art studio, and we are here to talk about reinvention, courage, and why action always beats perfection. And today we are talking about a place that is deeply uncomfortable, but absolutely necessary. I call it the in-between space. And the in-between space is this messy, confusing, uncomfortable part of life where you are no longer who you were, but you're not yet the person you're becoming, where things that used to work are not quite working anymore, but you're not actually sure what's next. And so if you're at this pivot point right now, if your life is feeling kind of this confusing molasses, this episode is for you. Let's get into it. I want to begin with a story, and I want to share my personal experience of getting into this in-between space. It's from a couple years ago. So about 2.5 years ago, I found myself in this inner molasses. On the outside, everything was fine. There was no big crisis. There was no big shift in my life. Things were kind of fine, but I started to feel really deflated inside, like things I used to enjoy drain my energy. Um, Not just I was feeling that way, but my business started to go sideways. And again, there was no external reason for that to happen. And one of the scariest things is I didn't even want to make art. And I've talked about before on my previous episodes where it was a big battle for me to start making art in my 40s. I had to overcome a lot of inner limiting beliefs. And so art is something I love. And when I was in this in between place, I didn't want to make art. It kind of scared me, to be honest. And it, looking back, I realized that I was at a pivot point. I was at a threshold. I had actually outgrown where I had been, and I was ready to move forward. But the reason I call it this in between space is I didn't realize that's what was happening. And that's actually one of the challenges. One is to realize that's happening, but the other is I didn't want to admit it. And one of the reasons that people that I work with get stuck in this in between space is it is scary to admit to ourselves that things that used to work aren't working, that we are changing and evolving, because the minute we admit that to ourselves, something has to change. And change is scary, change is uncertain. The human brain hates change because it would much rather stay in the familiar, even if the familiar doesn't feel alive anymore, even if it doesn't energize you, because familiar is safe. Your brain is always in love with the familiar because it means safe. The minute we create change or do something new, there's possible danger for the brain. Things could go wrong and it doesn't want to do that. And so often, and this was the case for me, we stay in this in-between place. We don't even want to recognize we're there because once we admit it to ourselves, once we recognize that we have outgrown who we were or a certain part of our lives, well, that means that something has to change. And so this is where I found myself a few years ago. And it actually reminded me of another time that I was in the in-between space when I was running a tech company. And it was a company I built and loved, but I started to really dread it. Something I loved. It's a really scary feeling to dread something you used to love, right? I started to dread it. I started to withdraw. I felt really deflated, and I did not have the guts to tell myself the truth at the time. And I wish I had, but that was another time. And so we go through these in-between places in our lives. That's why I call it a necessary but difficult moment, because it's it's an essential part of growth and being human and reinventing. You can think of it as the chrysalis between the caterpillar and the butterfly, right? You have the caterpillar, and then the caterpillar goes into this chrysalis and into this goo. I call it the goo. It just totally disintegrates. It's not a caterpillar, but it's not yet a butterfly. And it takes time. There's time that it spends in this chrysalis before it emerges into the butterfly. And so the first thing I just want you to hear that if you're in this in-between space, there's nothing that's broken. There's nothing that's wrong with you. It's actually a very powerful signal that something new is trying to emerge. It's not a failure, it's transition. You're on the precipice of your next expansion, right? Which is really beautiful, but it's still difficult. And so, how do we overcome that? Well, one is like, how do we overcome the tendency to just want to pull back? Like, no, I want to go back to my caterpillar, right? I don't, it's scary. I don't know how to open my butterfly wings, right? So, the, we have to get honest with ourselves about the cost of waiting, the cost of just hanging on, the cost of hanging on to our old identity and the old things that are no longer feeling good. That is not free, right? Your brain might try to convince you that, hey, it's safer. Things are okay. Like nothing is wrong. Stay here. But the only reason your brain is doing that is because it is safe. But you're not here in this lifetime to be safe. You're here to experience deep excitement and flourishing and aliveness. And to do that, we have to continually evolve and grow because that is the nature of life. That is the nature of a butterfly, and that is the nature of you as a human being. And there's a cost to staying stuck in this in-between place because we start to build up this inner resentment. And it can be pretty quiet, but we start to resent, and it comes out as, like, in my case, I started to snap at people in my life. I kind of lost my stress buffer. So things would stress me out and then I get resentful. Look how stressful things are. So there's a cost to it. And it literally drains your energy to stay in a place where you're not aligned with it anymore. So it is not free. And this is one of the biggest lessons that I've learned is we don't want to rush ourselves through our chrysalis, right? We don't want to rush ourselves through this in between. But at the same time, we don't just want to sit there because that is not what we're meant to do. We're actually meant to reinvent. And so how do you do this? How do you figure out how to move forward if you're not quite certain what this new chapter is or new step in your work or new thing in your life? Like, how do you know? Well, the first thing I want to tell you is you cannot think your way into it. Okay. If you could think your way into it, you would have done it already. If it was as easy as just like analyzing more, overthinking more, oh my goodness, I did plenty of that. I am sure you do plenty of that. You would have already done it. So thinking, analyzing, it's not going to help you actually emerge out of this in between and figure out what is this new evolution? What is this reinvention? What is this next chapter for you? So what do you do instead? Well, you have to start to take small steps forward, or a better analogy that I love is you have to start just putting strokes on an empty canvas, right? We're in my art studio. So that's the analogy that aligns with me. How do you figure out what to do? How do you figure out what to paint on your canvas? How do you figure out what steps to take? This is the best strategy that I have found is you have to really deeply listen to yourself and kind of be this archaeologist, right? To look for things that fill you with some enthusiasm, that when you think about it, you're like, oh, this, one of my mentorship clients who was part of my Unleash Your Next Accelerator she was in this in-between space. And she said, everything is kind of fine. My job is fine. My life is fine, but I'm unhappy. I feel stuck. And she said, I don't know, like, what's some big change I want to make? And I said, don't make a big change. And I said, what are some things that you just kind of have thought about doing, or that when you think about doing it, you're like, oh, that. And she said, oh, joining a singing group. She said, I love to sing, but I haven't done it. And it's something I love, but I just haven't done it. But I've thought about, I've researched actually, and that's it, right? And so that's a thread to pull. So you want to listen to yourself. You want to look for like those things that give you that spark of enthusiasm. And then you have to pull the thread. You have to start putting the strokes on that canvas. And you have to do it without trying to create a plan or a goal or some perfect sequence of things, because this is such an important thing to understand. Clarity does not come before you act. Clarity emerges as you take action. And so you're in this in-between space. You can't make some big leap. You can't make some big decision because you're in this place of evolving and changing. So you want to listen and you want to look for those things that give you energy, that energize you, that spark you. One of the things, so when I was in my in-between space that I mentioned a few years ago, I started to do this kind of inner archaeology to look for those things. And one of the things that emerged for me was that I had been painting. I started painting in my 40s after spending most of my life denying that I was an artist because it didn't fit into this box of, a tech CEO or business professional. But I was painting, but it was always this thing I was doing like on the side. And I mentioned to you when I was in this in-between space, I didn't even feel like painting. But when I asked myself, like, what energizes me? Like, what's something I've wanted to try? I realized I was kind of tired of a two-dimensional canvas. And so I said, I've always wanted to try to figure out how to make work that's a little more sculptural. And I said, okay, I have no idea. Like, I have no idea what I'm even talking about, but I'm just going to give it a try. And I was looking through a book one day, and it was about Dubuffet, who is a very well-known French artist. And I had seen some of his sculptures before. You might have seen them. They're pretty big. They're usually white background with some black or red lines on them. And in the book, I read that he made them out of foam. Interesting, like industrial strength foam that he cut. And that just like gave me an idea. So I looked on Amazon and I found some foam sheets and I ordered them. And then I like Googled, like, how do you cut foam? So there's different ways. I got a hot knife and I just started playing with it. Right. And out of that emerged some of my signature artworks, which are with foam. You know what? If you're listening, give me 10 seconds. If you're watching on YouTube, hold on. I'm going to grab one of them. All right, it's my podcast, right? I get to do what I want. So here is one of these 3D works. Let's see if you can see it. Okay, this is one of the 3D works that I made. So you can see these pieces on the side. So these are made out of foam. So this is the work. I'm going to put it down. Okay, show and tell. Show and tell is over. And if you're listening to this episode, I encourage you to go to my YouTube channel. Just Google Natalie Kogan YouTube so you can see the 3D artwork that I showed. And so I started to make these 3D artworks. So I cut the foam and I cover it in this medium, and then I color it and I construct them. And it created this new form of art that I have been exploring and creating. And I'm about to go to Mexico City to exhibit my art there. And I'm bringing some of my 3D pieces. But I'm giving you this example because it's just something that I was interested in. I was curious about. I just wanted to not be so flat on the canvas. And once I decided to pull that thread to just explore that, I got this idea. I started to experiment. And here's the thing that happened. When I kind of renewed my art and I started to make this different kind of art, I started to have other ideas about my business, I created a new keynote, other things in my business. So this is why action is magic, because if you can just start taking small steps towards something that is energizing to you, that is interesting to you, you get into momentum. you're now in motion. You're not just stuck in this goo of molasses of, I'm not sure what to do. I'm trying to think it. I don't know. You're now in motion. And action is beautiful because it gives us information. Even if you try something and you don't like it, you have information. You know something you don't like. But also just when we're in momentum, when we start moving forward, there's a lot of things that start to circulate. Ideas start to come to you. You feel more energized, and other threads, you start to pull on other threads. And so that is the way forward from this in-between place. If you're in it, you are not broken. There's nothing wrong with you, but you don't just want to kind of hang on to it, right? You do want to emerge into your next butterfly. And so remind yourself, you're not broken. There's nothing wrong with you. You are evolving, but you have to get messy. You have to try a bunch of different things to get to that next version of yourself. And so that is what I did. And I still continue to make the foam art, but all other kinds of ideas, both in my art and my work and my life, emerged. Some of them I tried and they didn't work. Some of them I tried and they did feel aligned, and I've created new mentorship programs. I've created a new keynote. I have redecorated a room in our house. So there's different things that I've changed, but the magic is just that. You have to be willing to get messy, to try different things, not to take leaps, but to take these small steps. And the main thread to pull on is things that just give you that spark inside. They don't have to be big things, and to trust that the more steps that you take, the more information you get, the more clarity emerges, and the more you begin to evolve, the more you are spreading your butterfly wings, and the more you become this next version of yourself, not the next version of yourself, a next version of yourself. And that's another thing to remember. Life is reinvention and evolution. We're always growing and expanding. And so that's why I'm a little bit allergic to this idea of a best self. Be your best self. I don't know. It's your version. You're emerging into the next version of yourself, and you will go through this reinvention and growth again and again. That's the beautiful part about being alive. There is not one best version. There's just the next version that feels most aligned to you. And so if you are at this pivot point, give yourself this gift of not overanalyzing, not overthinking, not overplanning, but recognizing that you're on the threshold of your next becoming, of your next evolution, of your next reinvention, and listen in deeply for that whisper. It could be really quiet, of something that you want to try, that you're enthusiastic about, and then exercise your magic power, which is to take action and to take small steps to explore it. So here is your dare for this week. Identify one area in your life that feels maybe like molasses, that feels unsettled, that feels like it's not aligned anymore. Somewhere, I don't know, it's somewhere where you're dragging your feet, okay? And once you have it, find one specific action, tiny action, that feels even like 5% lighter or more interesting or more exciting or more alive, and then do it today. Don't wait for a plan. Just make that first stroke on your canvas and then go from there. That's it for today's episode of Dare Yourself. If you found value in this conversation, please hit follow and share this episode with one person who feels a little stuck or in between right now. I'm Natalie Kogan, and I'll be back with another episode of Dare Yourself. And in the meantime, stop waiting and take one step forward to move towards a place you'd really love to be.